We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget.
Why would a defense secretary fight to restore the names of Confederate generals to U.S. military bases and then struggle to explain it under oath? Senator Angus King wasn't buying the answer, and this exchange exposed a much bigger fight over history, truth, and who gets honored by the United States military.
Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia, where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to. Talk to people that serve at Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood that has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in recognition, in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget, telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on a defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting, in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget, in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face. And
that's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
We're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's 2 bills, 1 budget. We're working with OMB, and we feel very comfortable with the number of $961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department? That's my question.
Senator, this is a straight-up budget for the Defense Department, and it's a
It is
13%
not.
increase over what Joe Biden
It is a
gave us.
two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What made this moment so striking is that Senator Angus King didn't approach this as a culture war argument. He approached it as a question of basic American loyalty. He starts by grounding the issue in lived experience, growing up in Virginia, being taught to revere Robert E. Lee, and then later learning what Lee actually did. Not mythology, not nostalgia, facts. Lee broke his oath, took up arms against the United States, and led an army fighting explicitly to preserve slavery. That framing matters because it cuts through the emotional haze that often surrounds this debate. King isn't confused about the history, he's puzzled by the decision-making, and that's the key difference. He asks a simple but devastating question. Why is the Department of Defense going through incredible gymnastics to restore names tied to people who committed treason against the United States? Who is pushing this? What is the motivation? Hegseth's answer avoids the core issue almost immediately. Instead of addressing the moral or historical argument, he shifts to sentiment. He talks about legacy, tradition, and emotional attachment. He claims service members feel connected to names like Fort Bragg or Fort Benning because that's where they trained, deployed from, and returned home to. That's not an answer to King's question. It's a reframing designed to sidestep it. Here's what's missing from Hegseth's response. No one is erasing the service of modern soldiers by refusing to honor Confederate generals. Soldiers didn't deploy for Robert E. Lee. They deployed for the United States of America. Their bravery doesn't come from a base name. It comes from their service, their sacrifice, and their mission. King calls this out directly when he says, "We're not erasing history, we're recognizing it." That line matters because it exposes the false premise behind Hegseth's argument. The original naming of these bases wasn't neutral history, racial equality. Restoring those names today isn't about honoring soldiers. It's about reviving symbols that were always meant to send a message. And King is clearly saying that message dishonors the country, not its troops. When Hegseth claims veterans universally want these names back, that's another assertion without evidence. Service members are not a monolith. Many have publicly supported renaming efforts precisely because they don't want to serve on bases named after men who fought to destroy the nation they swore to defend. King doesn't even argue that replacement honorees were unworthy. He simply insists that honoring traitors is incompatible with American values. Then the exchange shifts to the budget, and this is where a second pattern emerges. Once again, King asks for transparency. Why split the defense budget into two parts? Why present one number publicly while hiding another chunk in reconciliation? Why deny this committee a full, honest picture of military spending? Hegseth's answers mirror his earlier strategy. Assert confidence, deny deception, but never actually address the substance. King presses him repeatedly, pointing out that reconciliation is a partisan process that undermines the bipartisan tradition of defense oversight. And again, the question goes unanswered. Taken together, these moments reveal something bigger than a naming dispute or a budget disagreement. They show a defense secretary who is comfortable making sweeping decisions about history, honor, and spending, but deeply uncomfortable explaining them under scrutiny. King isn't shouting, he's not grandstanding, he's calmly insisting on clarity, honesty, and accountability. That's why this exchange matters. This isn't about political correctness or cancel culture. It's about who we choose to honor, what values the military represents, and whether the American public is being told the truth about decisions made in its name. When leaders can't clearly explain why they're restoring Confederate symbols or why they're obscuring defense spending, it raises serious questions about whose interests are actually being served. And those are questions Americans deserve answers to.